So hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Chocolate Life Live. My name's Clay Gordon, and today our topic is going to be perhaps an interesting one, and it is, what is chocolate? As you can see from the image of the post on the Chocolate Life for today's live stream. What is chocolate? A disclaimer, because I've used photographs of dogs in the past. No chocolate was offered to dogs as a part of doing the research on this. For people who may know, chocolate can be toxic to dogs, and we want to make sure that we don't endanger any animals during the course of the work that we're doing here. But what I want to talk about is, what is chocolate? Last Friday, we did a how to taste chocolate. Before that, we did a Brazilian chocolate tasting. And in the course of those episodes, it occurred to me that having a discussion about what chocolate is, right, which was brought to the fore in the episode on debunking, when we wanted to ask, is there such a thing as white chocolate? Is white chocolate really chocolate? And for those people who are on the fence about it, the answer is absolutely yes. White chocolate is really chocolate. But I want to do a deep dive. If you're a chocolate maker, this is something you're going to want to know. If you're interested in the subject of chocolate more generally, it may be of interest to you. And I'll also say, before I get too much further, that I am not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV, and I don't play one on the internet. And so if you do have questions that stray over into legal aspects of your business, you're going to want to sit down and actually talk with a real lawyer who has experience in these areas. But I'm just going to go through and go through my understanding of what the regulations talk about. So this is the post on the Chocolate Life right now. So here is the homepage as it exists. You can go to TheChocolateLife.com. You can click through to the post for every single one of the live streams. I put together a post where you can go through, you can learn a little bit about background. There are links to other resources. For example, here, the debunked live stream that I was talking about. And then you'll have a primary link, or a link to the primary resource that we're going to be looking at today. Now, I am going to be talking about other resources, other web pages that you probably want to know about within the existing Code of Federal Regulations and other part of the FDA web ecosystem around chocolate. And so after today's live stream is over, I'm going to be putting the links to those pages onto this post on the Chocolate Life. And you'll find them right down in this area here. So let me enlarge the screen so you can get a better view of what it is that I'm doing. And please note that, the goal here is not for you to necessarily be able to read these pages. I know that they're difficult to read here, but that you can get my analysis of them, and then you can go to the pages in question and play back parts of the live stream that are of interest to you, so that you can dive into these things in detail. Also, if you're watching, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn, you can go to the chat or comments and just do a quick shout out. Let me know who's watching and where you're tuning in from today. I'll get that up on the screen, and a shout out for everyone who's joining. Just like to know where in the world people are watching, and what the community is like today. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. So in the United States, right, it's important to know that we have something called the Code of Federal Regulations. And the Code of Federal Regulations incorporates all of the laws that are on the books in the United States. And the link here is to the electronic Code of Federal Regulations, or the ECFR. And what I've done is I've gone through and navigated to the page which talks about cocoa and chocolate, or cacao products. Specifically, it's Title 21, right, which is about food and drugs. Chapter 1, which is around food, then subchapter B, food for human consumption, and then part 163, which is in cacao products. So this is the way it's organized. If we wanted to go back to the entire Title 21, we can find out what all the subchapters are, and you can do this. And then you could also go back and see what all the other titles are about. But today we're focused on this particular one, Part 163, Cacao Products. So we're talking about other areas of the US code where we get the legal authority to be able to say the things that we're doing, citations that also provide the legal authority for what we're doing. And let's start and talk with the basis. So methods of analysis. So what they're doing here is they're setting out what are the testing methods that are going to be used to support any of the analyses which are going to be required in order to be able to classify some of these products. So for example, if you want to know how we're going to measure fat content of something, what you do is you go to this particular document and you find out where the how you go and measure fat content. Very, very simple, right? And then we have subpart B, which are the requirements for specific standardized cocoa products. And we're working from the ground up. What are cacao nibs? So cacao nibs are a food prepared by removing the shell from cured, cleaned, so cured, fermented, cleaned, dried, and cracked cacao beans, right? Okay, so what this says is if we are going to be looking at some of the new ways of creating cacao analogs like cell culturing or fermentation, they may not legally be, well, they're not cacao nibs, right? Because they're not made by removing the shell from cocoa beans. So that's good to know. And it's also really important to be able to point out that if you're selling nibs, the amount of cacao shell in the nibs can be no more than 1.75% by weight, right? So calculated on an alkali-free basis. So this is before any alkalization or neutralization or any other step which adds a chemical to the cacao nibs. You have to have less than 1.75% by weight of shell in the nibs. Now, if I'm an industrial chocolate maker, I probably want to get as close to that 1.75% as I can because weight has a value. There's a price attached to it. If I'm a small chocolate maker, I might want to get that number to as close to zero as possible. But here we see what cacao nibs are, and we have the definition for how much shell can and can't be in right off the top. So thanks to Mark, who is and Yuri, who are coming in from Denver. We're hoping help us translate Ruby chocolate, deviating from standard of identity, temporary permit for market testing. Is this the latest publication on the product? So if what you can do, Mark, if you can actually send me the link to that, I would be happy to be able to examine it. I do know a fair bit about Ruby. I can tell you what it is that I know about Ruby. And I will do that, but I will do that in the context as I run through this, if we can. So once you have cacao nibs, you can alkalize them, right? And then you can actually you can further processing by adding some neutralizing agents. So this description, what cacao nibs are, it mentions alkalizing agents and neutralizing agents, and it goes through and saying, if you're going to have an alkalizing agent, here's what you can use: ammonium, potassium, or sodium bicarbonate, carbonate or hydroxide. So this lists that if you're going to be doing some alkalization of cocoa nibs, these are the chemicals that you're allowed to use. If you're going to be using any neutralizing neutralizing chemicals, neutralizing agency, these are the chemicals that you can use, and what are the amounts that you can use, the maximum amounts that you can use. And then if part C is, if you follow the steps in A and B, which means if your product conforms to the description and the ingredients, then what you can do is you can call these things cacao nibs or cocoa nibs or cracked cocoa, right? And then it says if you are going to alkalize them, you need to say processed with an alkali. If you're going to say if you do use a neutralizing agency, you need to name the neutralizing agent. And what you have to do is you have to put these indications on the label. Now, very, very helpfully, there is a label declaration section. And what it does is there are links to part 101 and part 130 of this chapter. And so what we need to do is we need to go to part 101. And here we find all the rules around labeling food products. So it's not just enough to know what are the rules and regulations around cocoa, part 163. we need to know the rules and regulations around labeling, right? And you'll find them here. There's also guidance. So there's a document which has graphics in it, which is much more clearly describes what these labels look like. And so I don't have it here, but I can get the link to that and post it. But it will tell you what you need to do in order to legally label your products. And so what I would do is I would do a quick search and see if I can find the word chocolate. And it says, oh, so calorie declarations with respect to chocolate. All right, so we can find things that are specifically related to chocolate in here. And then section 130 is about general food standards, right? So really, really important to know what they are. They apply to chocolate. But one of the things you do want to know here, you want to pay attention, is if you're going to be adding things to your chocolate, right, you need to use ingredients that are called safe and suitable. And safe and suitable means that the ingredient is not a food additive or a color additive, as defined in section 201 of the Federal Food Drug. So boom, if you're adding coloring, you're adding flavorings, you now need to know about another section of the code generally, so that you can understand whether or not that colorant or flavoring is in fact legally allowable in a food. So in addition to 163, you need to know about 101 and 130 at the very minimum. You need to be conversant in this and understand how these other two sections affect how you're going to label your product and other ingredients that can and can't be in what it is that you're making. So now that we know what cacao nibs are, right, we've started the basis, we get the next one, which is called chocolate liquor, right? So chocolate liquor is a solid or semi-plastic food prepared by finely grinding cacao nibs. Now, notice there's no description about how finely these need to be ground. So this can be a coarsely ground liquor. It can be a very finely ground liquor. There's no identification in the standard here that says how coarsely or finely I need to grind them, right? But the fat content of the food may be adjusted by adding one of the more of the optional ingredients. That's really important to know. Okay, specified in paragraph B1. So we're going to go here and figure out what that is. Okay, chocolate liquor contains not less than 50% nor more than 60% by weight of cacao fat, right? And this is really, really important to know for so-called two-ingredient chocolate makers, right? So if you're using a cocoa bean, which is 47% fat, and you actually have an ingredient label declaration that says chocolate liquor on it, your chocolate liquor may not actually be legally able to be called chocolate liquor because it doesn't have at least 50% fat, right? So not that I think that anybody is going to call you out and take you to court because you're at 47% fat instead of 50% fat. It's just, it's important to know that if you're going to call it chocolate liquor, it needs to have at least 50% fat. Now, that chocolate liquor doesn't, the cacao nibs don't need to be 50% fat. They could be 47% fat. And you can add additional fat to them to get to the 50% level. But chocolate liquor does need to contain 50% fat at a minimum. All right, we can add alkali ingredients, we can add neutralizing agencies, and chocolate liquor, believe it or not, can be spice flavored or seasoned. That's interesting. So, okay, so what are some optional ingredients? Notice that the language safe and suitable, because we saw safe and suitable under food's general standards, safe and suitable. All right, so we got some self-referential stuff going on here. So I can add cacao fat, okay, right? And I can add cocos, and cocos are defined further down. The cocoa liquor can have alkali ingredients and neutralizing agents, and the cocoa liquor, the chocolate liquor, can have flavorings. They can have spices, natural and artificial flavorings, ground whole nut meats, ground coffee, dried malted cereal extracts, and any other season that does not either singly or in combination impart a flavor that imitates the flavor of chocolate milk or butter. Okay, so it's interesting. We think of chocolate liquor, we think of chocolate liquor as being, I don't know why I said chocolate liver, I've said that twice. Chocolate liquor we think of it being the prima materia, the raw ingredient, the thing from which we make chocolate. But, right, it turns out that the legal definition says I can add flavoring ingredients to this. So a spice, for example, I believe includes salt. So I could add salt to my liquor. All right. I can grind in nuts into my liquor. Right. Notice also I can add butter or milk fat, or actually salt is not a spice. Salt is declared separately. I can add butter or milk fat. So why would I add butter or milk fat to a chocolate liquor? And normally I wouldn't add butter per se. I would add anhydrous butter fat, which is ghee. It is butter from which all the water has been removed. So an anhydrous milk fat. And why I would use that is that it will slow down the crystallization from form 5 into form 6 crystals. So it acts sort of as a preservative. If you want, it reduces the likelihood or the speed of cocoa butter bloom if I'm going to use a milk fat. And it actually makes for a softer mouthfeel. It interferes to some extent with how hard the form 5 crystal structure sets up. And so just, interesting that I can have something called chocolate liquor, right? And it's not necessarily a pure product. And if you are lactose intolerant or you are a vegan, you need to make sure, looking at the label declaration, right, what it is that goes into your chocolate liquor. So interesting. So, hey, I want to say hello to everyone at Encore Coffee from Kansas City, Missouri, from checking in today. Thanks very much for the shout out. So if I conform to all of these things, right, I can call this thing chocolate liquor. I can call it chocolate, unsweetened chocolate, bitter chocolate, baking chocolate, cooking chocolate. I can also call it chocolate coating or unsweetened chocolate coating. For the most part, the coatings are used, colloquially, coatings are used when we're using non-cocoa butter fats, but it is legal to call a chocolate liquor that only has cacao fat in it. You could call it a chocolate coating. So there could be some confusion. Just because it says coating doesn't necessarily mean that it contains a fat which is not cocoa butter. Notice what's missing from here. There's no cocoa mass. There's no chocolate mass. So there are terms that many of us use to refer to chocolate liquor, but cocoa liquor or cacao liquor is not one of the terms, right? If we want to stay within the legal declaration, we need to call it, at least in the United States, we need to call it chocolate liquor or unsweetened chocolate or bitter chocolate, right? So anyway, if we're going to add an alkali ingredient, we need to put it in the label declaration. If we're going to use a neutralizing agent, we need to declare it on the label. If I'm going to be using a spice or a flavoring, I need to add it to the label. So if somebody is using it's interesting, however, right? It's interesting, however, you notice section 5 here. Oh, so one or more spices specifies B4 and B5. Okay, so if I'm in B4 or B5, I need to declare it on the label. Very, very cool. So spice flavored with butter added, with milk fat added. So I need to make sure that those are declared on the label. But notice that B6 is not listed. So if you add salt to your recipe, right, in your chocolate liquor, you do need it looks like you do not need to declare salt as an ingredient. Now, if you were to do a nutrition label, obviously sodium would be one of the nutrients that you'd need to declare on the label. So it would show up in that part of the label, but you would not need to have flavored with salt, right, if you add it into your liquor. And it says when 2 or more of the statements, they may be combined as long as it's misleading. Whenever the name of the food appears on the label, so conspicuously is easily seen under customary conditions of purchase, the statement described in section, right, shall precede or follow the name without intervening printed. So if you have, chocolate liquor on the front of the label, if you add any other flavoring in it, it needs to be right below it with no text getting between the name of the food, in this case, chocolate liquor, for example, or bittersweet chocolate, and any ingredients you might add. So there's no confusion on the customer's part. And again, there's reference to part 101 and part 130 of the chapter. So we'll just want to make sure. Breakfast cocoa. Breakfast cocoa is the food prepared by pulverizing the material remaining after part of the cacao fat has been removed from nibs. So I take the nibs, I grind them into liquor. I don't actually need to grind them into liquor if I'm using an expeller press, but if I then extract some of the cocoa fat, cocoa butter from the cocoa nibs, and I create a press cake or some other expeller cake, then what I'm going to do is I can take that cake and I can grind it up, and it is what is called breakfast cocoa, generally what we would call cocoa powder, right? Now, importantly, this will be called what is called high-fat cocoa. So a high-fat cocoa has usually between 20 and 22 to 24% of fat left in behind, right? So just to let you know, you can go through and look in all of the subparts here, but these things build. There's a foundation, and these things build on top of the previous listings. There's a lot of duplication just to make sure that things are very, very clear, and there's no ambiguity in what it is that's going on. So again, we see that salt is listed separately from spices and flavorings. It can be used as long as they don't imitate chocolate milk or butter, and that we have to label it this way, and all these kinds of things. So cocoa, so breakfast cocoa is a high-fat cocoa. We just call them cocoa powder, and we would call it a high-fat cocoa because we can do that. The name of the food is high-fat cocoa. Yay. And it says breakfast cocoa contains not less than 22% by weight of fat, right? So there we go. So 22 to 24% fat in general. We then have cocoa, right? And we'd call this a medium fat cocoa, right? So this would be 10 to 22% by weight of cocoa butter. And then we have a low fat cocoa, which is less than 10% by weight. So now we have here the descriptions for what are low fat, medium fat, and high fat cocoa powders. All right, very, very simple. Then we get one which is none of us are ever going to use unless we're a big industrial scale chocolate manufacturer and we want to create an additive for compliance with a completely other description in the chapter, right? And this is something that would be used by big manufacturers who are using cocoa as an ingredient in other products that they're making. Not something that the small chocolate maker is likely to ever have to worry about. So, sweet chocolate. This is where things get interesting, right? There is no declaration within the Code of Federal Regulations with standardized cocoa products of what we think of as dark chocolate, right? There is no definition of dark chocolate. What we think colloquially, right, of as dark chocolate fits within this section here, 163.123, for dark chocolate, right? And we see that it's, so one way to think about it is if you go look at a label, and I encourage you to do this, is go look at a label for Hershey's Special Dark Chocolate. What you'll do is you see that the Special Dark, there's an R in a circle. So Special Dark is a registered trademark. And somewhere else on the label, on the front, it will say mildly sweet chocolate. And sweet, mildly sweet means that this chocolate, even though it's called Special Dark, fits within the declaration for what we would call sweet chocolate. That makes an enormous amount of sense, right? You can get all the ingredients that are here. And it says the finished sweet chocolate contains less than 12% by weight of total milk solids. So a sweet chocolate, even though this is what we think of as dark chocolate, can contain milk and milk products. That's weird. So we have semi-sweet chocolate or bittersweet chocolate is sweet chocolate that contains not less than 35% weight of chocolate liquor. Okay. So it turns out that there is no legal distinction between semi-sweet chocolate and bittersweet chocolate. It's just that semi-sweet and or bittersweet chocolate have at least 35% by weight of chocolate liquor, Whereas I'm looking at this, sweet chocolate contains not less than 15% by weight. So Hershey's special dark chocolate, because it's a sweet chocolate, will contain somewhere between 15%, right, and 35% of chocolate liquor, right? And that's the distinction, right? Now, however, there is no legal distinction between semi-sweet chocolate or bittersweet chocolate. It's just, there is none. And you'll notice that there is no definition. The word dark does not appear anywhere in these definitions. So what are some ingredients? So in addition to chocolate liquor, right, in your sweet chocolate, all right, we can have added fat, cocoa butter. Now notice that the only fat that can be in here other than a milk fat is in fact cacao fat. So you cannot use a palm kernel oil, a palm oil, you cannot use coconut oil, you cannot use olive oil, you cannot use any other oil in the definition of chocolate. If you add any other oil in the chocolate listing ingredients, you cannot legally call it chocolate. Now I know that there are people who are adding things like olive oil and calling it, olive oil chocolate. It doesn't work. It's chocolate flavored with olive oil. That's the way it would work, right? You cannot have olive oil in the ingredients. You cannot have coconut oil in the ingredients, right? And still call it chocolate legally, just straightforward there. So we can have cacao fat. We can have nutritive carbohydrate sweeteners. Noticeably, it doesn't say non-nutritive. So we can have sugar here, but it's not clear. It says here erythritol is a non-nutritive carbohydrate sweetener. It's covered in another part of the section, right? So you can still call it chocolate. So within it, I can have spices, natural and artificial flavorings, the same things that I can add to my liquor, as long as they don't imitate the flavor of chocolate, milk, or butter. They have to be safe and suitable, which is listed here, right? Now, notice that I can add dairy ingredients to colloquially what many people think of as dark chocolate. This is why it's important. If you make chocolate, if you're a chocolate consumer, you want to make sure that you're eating vegan, you are in fact lactose intolerant, you do need to go read the back of the label. If something says dark chocolate on the front, that's no guarantee. If something says semi-sweet chocolate on the front, something says bittersweet chocolate on the front, there is no guarantee, right, that there are no dairy ingredients in the chocolate. Because, right, the standard of identity says I can add them. So I can add cream or milk fat or butter, right? So again, why might I add butter fat? The reason why I might add it is that it will extend the shelf life by reducing the likelihood that I'll get fat bloom, and also to make sure that the crystallization slows down. It makes it softer, bite and chew, and it won't go from form 5 to form 6 quite as fast as if I didn't have it. I can add milk, right? I can add concentrated or evaporated milk. I can add sweetened condensed milk. I can add dried milk, and dry milk, right? All right. So again, we're calling this, right, sweet chocolate. I can add skim milk in lots of different forms. I can add buttermilk in a bunch of different forms. I can add malted milk in a bunch of different, which is usually a powder. I can add emulsifying agents. So this would be lecithin, no matter where the lecithin is derived, whether it might be from soy or sunflower, canola or rapeseed, doesn't really matter. If I'm using a synthetic emulsifier, so PGPR, something like that, and as long as the total combination doesn't, right, exceed 1% by weight. Okay, very, very simple. Now, the name of the food is sweet chocolate, right? Semi-sweet chocolate, bittersweet chocolate, right? Right, as appropriate. Notice nowhere does it say dark chocolate. Okay, so there is no, so we're talking about, is white chocolate legally chocolate? We'll get to that. Just so you know, there is no legal definition for what dark chocolate is, right? So again, I don't think anybody is going to go and take you to court because you call something dark chocolate and it's not dark chocolate. But you do need to be careful. If you call it dark chocolate and there are in fact dairy ingredients in it, that might open you up to some liability for misleading marketing claims on the label. So just want to make sure. Again, after the nomenclature, we have the same thing. If you're using an alkalized cocoa nibs, you need to process with alkali. These things are very similar, and you find references to 101 and 130 down in here. So again, self-referential. This is where, this is the reference that I cited in the debunking claim. So section 163.124 around white chocolate. There is a standard of identity. These rules are called standards of identity for products, foods that you can eat, right? And there is a standard of identity for white chocolate. There's more legal weight for there being something called white chocolate than there is legal weight for there's something called dark chocolate, which just causes my head to explode in some respectful way. So you'll find out that if you want to create a white chocolate recipe, right, you got to have at least 25% cacao fat. You have to have not less than 3.5% by weight of milk fat, not less than 14% of total milk solids, right, and not more than 55% by weight of sugar. So that's the maximum. So if you have a white chocolate, you can't have more than 55% sugar in it. Just interesting definition. So if you're creating recipes, you need to know this stuff to create a recipe that conforms, right? So obviously it's white chocolate, and so I can add all these dairy ingredients, which I would expect. I can also add antioxidants. Ooh, why would I want to add an antioxidants to a white chocolate? Because all of the antioxidants that are in chocolate are in the cocoa powder, right? So if you remove the cocoa powder from the cocoa fat will go rancid much more quickly. And so you can add antioxidants to make sure. So this might be vitamin E, oil. There are any number of things that you might add. Some spices might have antioxidant properties in them, so they would do double duty. And I can add whey or whey products as long as they don't exceed more than 5%. And I can call this white chocolate, right? However, in the definition of chocolate, if I'm making the chocolate, it's white chocolate, right? And then if I'm going to have, if I grind in coffee beans, for example, right, I'm going to write flavored with coffee beans. I need to have a specific label declaration in order to be able to do that. So that makes sense to think about it, right? Notice that when we think about white chocolate, notice that all of the milks that they're talking about are animal milks. So either all from cows or sheep or camels or goats or any animal that delivers milk. So you cannot call a white chocolate made with coconut milk legally. You can't call it a milk, M-I-L-K, chocolate. Now, there actually are some movements afoot to enshrine this, right? People want to make sure that consumers are not confused, that if you talked about a milk chocolate that's made with coconut milk, I don't think there is any consumer confusion when it comes to that. And as a matter of fact, there is already a standard of identity which covers this. So we have this notion of bread, right? And so when I go by bread, I'm not confused with bread, but I can have modifiers to the bread. I can have whole wheat bread, or I can have rye bread, or I can have pumpernickel bread, right? So this notion of we have this generic food called bread, right? There's already this long history of adding lots of other ingredients. The standard of identity, right, legally says bread is made from wheat flour, right? And there are ways of declaring bread so that if you're using another grain, rye flour, you can do it and still call it bread. So I think there is in fact sort of a legal framework which says, nah, we should be able to call chocolate made with coconut milk chocolate. I think there are other places within the Code of Federal Regulations where it would make sense to have a parallel construction, but the dairy lobby is very, very influential, and we'll see if they're able to go and make this happen. If I can file an amicus brief at some point with them, I would argue against the dairy industry in that particular case. So just as we have this white chocolate standard of identity, we have a milk chocolate standard of identity. And again, milk chocolate contains not less than 10% of chocolate liquor. You need to have at least 3.39% of milk fat and not less than 12% total milk solids, right? There is, unlike white chocolate, there does not appear to be an upper bound on the amount of sugar that can be in it, which is interesting. So in white chocolate, there's an upper bound on the amount of sugar. It is not clear that there's an upper bound on the amount of sugar that can be in a milk chocolate. And obviously, a milk chocolate has to have 10% by weight of chocolate liquor, right? So again, if you're formularizing recipes, you need to be aware of these things. So like sweet chocolate, like white chocolate, I can add cocoa fat, I can add sugar, I can add spices and flavorings as long as they don't imitate the flavor of chocolate milk or butter. I can add a bunch of different dairy ingredients. Please note that I can add malted milk into white chocolate, but it doesn't look like I can add malted milk into milk chocolate. That's kind of weird. It's there, again, 1% by weight of emulsifiers. And I call this thing milk chocolate. And same nomenclature issues with a reference to section 101 and 130. If you are going to be using buttermilk, so buttermilk is not allowed in milk chocolate, but it is allowed in white chocolate, and it is allowed in sweet chocolate. However, if you wanted to, if you use buttermilk, you could just label it as buttermilk chocolate, which is an interesting concept. If I'm using skim milk, right, I can call it, so rather than a whole milk or a full fat cream, if I'm using skim milk powder, I can actually label it as skim milk if I wanted to, as a skim milk chocolate as opposed to whole milk chocolate. Right? If I use more than one dairy ingredient, right, I can, the name of the food is chocolate, preceded by the designation of the milk ingredients. So milk and skim milk. So, right. So if I'm using more than one kind of dairy, I can list it. Anyway, so you get the idea. We're now going into sweet cocoa and vegetable fat coating, sweet chocolate and vegetable fat coating. These are what we might call compounds. So if we're using a non-cocoa butter fat, this is where the standards of identity, the listing of ingredients, right, that can and cannot be in that product, this is where they're listed. So I can use safe and suitable vegetable fats, oils, and sterins other than cacao fat. They may be hydrogenated. They don't have to be. I can add dairy-derived ingredients. I can add bulking agents, formulation aids, humectants, and texturizers. So for example, I might be putting together, I might be making a chocolate chip. I want the chocolate chip to be able to hold its shape during baking. And so I might add dextrose or something like that. The dextrose is going to absorb moisture. It's going to help the chip retain its shape. And so that's what I might think of as a bulking agent, a formulation aid, a humectant, and a texturizer. That's one of those ingredients that we bear. So you can add these things to be able to control the performance of the chocolate for very, very different applications. As a matter of fact, I just finished writing an article for International Confectionery Magazine on cocoa butter equivalents and cocoa butter replacements, where this topic came up. It's going to be in the August issue. I don't know if it's out yet, but in the August issue of International Confectionery Magazine, you can go find the article on cocoa butter equivalents and cocoa butter replacements. And just for people who may want to, there is an article on the Chocolate Life, sort of gone below the fold on the homepage. Where is it? So let's actually go look at the search capability. So International Confectionery, right? So there's this article here on the Chocolate Life. and you can, it's a list of every article that I've written for International Confectionery over the course of the last year. And so there's a click to read the preview. And when you go to International Confectionery Magazine, their website, you can sign up for a free subscription. So just a little bit of background there. So that we've come to the end of CFR 21.163 cacao products, right? And we've gone a fairly extensive deep dive. Is if you're making a chocolate product and you want to know what can and cannot be in the chocolate, right, in order to be able to meet the definition of something, Part 163 is what you need to know about. When you put together your labels, you want to know about Part 101, and you're also going to want to be familiar with food standards in general. Now, for people who are outside the US and in other parts of the world, most countries will have their own version of the Code of Federal Regulation, or what they may do is they may be using the Codex Alimentarius. This is an effort which is, as you can see, is put together by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, as well as the World Health Organizations. And within the Codex Alimentarius, what you'll do is you'll find that there is a standard for cocoa and chocolate, and these are all downloadable PDFs, but I'll put the link to the homepage, and you can find out all the other standards that exist in the world. Why is this important? Right? The reason why it's important is that if I am in Europe, where it is okay in many parts, well, in the EU, it is okay to add up to 5% non-cocoa butter fat into a chocolate and still label it as chocolate, I cannot ship that chocolate to the United States labeled as chocolate. And so if you're going to be exporting to any other country of the world, right, you need to know what the standards are for what can and can't be in chocolate in other parts of the world for your product to legally conform, right, to their local definitions. And so the Codex Alimentarius is a great place to start. So it's interesting, right? So in the United States, we got to call it chocolate liquor, right? But, right, in other parts of the world, you can call it cocoa or cacao mass in addition to liquor, right? So I think that one of the reasons why people in the United States can get away with calling it cacao mass is that generally there's agreement that we can go back and forth. And as long as the Codex Alimentarius and the Code of Federal Regulations don't conflict with each other, they are to some extent interchangeable. So this, I believe, forms the basis. While I can use cacao mass on a label, I don't actually have to call it chocolate liquor, right? Or I can call it chocolate mass. So anyway, so I'm going to put a link to this page on the Codex Alimentarius so that you can find these standards for you. So related standards, this contaminants article here might have information on cadmium, for example. So just important to keep, on top of other standards that might affect what it is that you're doing. Especially if what you're going to be doing is you're going to be exporting. I mean, from Canada to the United States, from the US to Canada or to Europe, understanding what the regulations are in other countries, really, really important. Now, having gone through all of that, what I want to do is I want to spend the last 20, 15 minutes or so, talking about some other aspects of the regulations as a chocolate maker you are going to want to know about. You're going to want to familiarize yourself with these documents and how they apply to you. So the first one, and again, I'm going to be providing links to these pages on the Chocolate Life in this page, the What is Chocolate page. So you don't need to worry about getting them right now. They're going to be on this page later this afternoon. So number one, so you need to know about the Food Safety Modernization Act. The Food Safety Modernization Act is the overall framework, which provides guidance with respect to what you need to do in your factory in order to make sure that you are following what might be called good manufacturing processes. It's just, it says here, the global food system is changing in amazing ways. We have foodborne illnesses that are coming in by vectors that we've never identified before. And what you need to know is if you're manufacturing a product, if you're manufacturing chocolate, right, that you need to know what the FSMA is about, and you need to know how it affects your business, right? And it does affect your business. You need to know. So for example, you probably want to have a set of standard operating procedures. The standard operating procedures are going to define how you do everything, right? And so if you have an inspector, right? Oh, and by the way, I mean, if you're a chocolate manufacturing facility, you have to register your chocolate manufacturing facility with the FDA. And once you register it, they can come and inspect you as long as it's business hours and you're open for business. You have to let them into your facility. So just to let you know. So you need to know what the Food Safety Modernization Act is about. You need to know how it applies to your business, and you need to know how you implement your procedures to be able to comply with the FSMA. Another thing that you need to know about is what's called the FSVP. That's the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, which means if you're purchasing product from a source that's overseas, then you need to know you need to be able to verify who that supplier is, and you need to make sure that, for example, if they're a manufacturing facility, that they're registered with the FDA, that if there are phytosanitary requirements for importing stuff, you need to know, all right, what your exposure is under the FSVP, and you need to make sure that you have all the documents and everything you need to make sure you're in compliance with the FSVP. And it should be in your standard operating procedure book, right? This says, when you evaluate a new vendor, we look at the FSVP and we say, oh, we need to have the following paperwork, X and Y and Z. Now, part of this is also done, right, as a food safety issue, which means if there is a recall, you need to know where the source of potential contamination is, right? So, did it come from the cocoa beans that you imported? Did it come from maybe it's an exotic inclusion that you're bringing in from, another country? You need to know, you need to be able to identify where the potential source of the contaminant is. And so the Food Safety Modernization Act and the Foreign Supplier Verification Program are two important aspects of what you need to have in your GMP, good manufacturing processes. Whether you have a formal HACCP program, so hazard analysis of critical control points, you probably should understand what that's about and be able to incorporate, into your standard operating procedures, how we handle things like spills, for example, and how we handle cleaning, right? Because these end up being places where contaminants can be introduced into chocolate products that you're making. So really, really important to do that. If you are manufacturing chocolate from cocoa beans, one of the things that you probably don't know about, but that you need to know about, is that we have this guide to inspection of manufacturers of food products. We have section 3, which is chocolate and cocoa products. And one of the things that it says here is so it says, here's some guidance about how to do a cut test, right? But one of the things that it also says is that you need to have a magnetic trap, right? So determine in detail the firm's bean processing to include pre-cleaning, use of magnets to remove metal, right? So you are required by law to have a magnetic trap. You need to pour your beans through a magnetic trap so that if there are any ferrous magnetic objects in the bag of beans, right, that they are in fact removed. I don't think it's enough to do a visual inspection, right? Theoretically, if an FDA inspector comes in and says, oh, you are in fact a cocoa processing plant, they could look and say, you don't have a magnetic trap anywhere in your bean cleaning operation. They can shut you down until you can show them that you actually do have a magnetic trap. So number one, get a magnetic trap, right? As you clean your beans, pour them through some sort of hopper that has the magnetic trap in it, just to make sure that you meet the requirements of this. But no matter what, you should be aware of what an inspector is going to be looking for. If an FDA inspector is going to be looking for if you are processing cocoa beans. And here's where you find the kinds of things a federal inspector is going to be looking for. That federal inspector is going to be different from like a state agricultural markets inspector or a local health inspector. Right? Just quick to know. You should know about it. Another thing that you're going to want to know, you may or may not want to know, but if you are in fact a cocoa bean broker, or you're buying very large amounts of cocoa beans, or you have cocoa beans and you're warehousing them for other people, you should be aware of what are called coffee and cocoa bean sweeps. Basically, any cocoa beans that fall on the floor that you're going to turn around and sell. So here are regulations about how to handle cocoa beans that fall onto the floor. The FDA basically says they are adulterated because they've fallen on the floor. They are contaminated, and you can't turn around and try to sell them to someone else. I don't know. You probably don't want to use them in your own products unless they can be cleaned in some way. Interestingly enough, you can take these cocoa sweeps, rebag them, and export them. Right, sell them to someone outside the U.S. You just can't sell them to somebody inside the U.S. Not quite clear why that's the case, but apparently you can. Another thing to be aware of is that if you are a small business, you may be able to qualify for a nutrition labeling exemption, right? And so it's fairly complicated, but keep in mind that if you do not have a nutrition label on your bar or on any product, if you do not have a nutrition label on your product, you are actually required by law, right, to file an exemption. It's not a question of you don't have to do it, right? You are required by law to file an exemption if you do not want to put a nutrition label on your products, right? And so here's where you'll find the small business nutrition labeling exemption guidance. There's an introduction, there's a submission. You can do this on the web, instructions for completing the form. And there is, in fact, a list of all the companies that have applied for small business labeling exemptions. And what we can do is let's search for companies that have the word chocolate in the name. And we can find that a number of companies, Escazoo in North Carolina, Euphoria in Oregon, Dandelion has filed for an exemption. I can understand why for some products. So, by the way, you can have a small business labeling exemption for some of your products, not all of your products. You do need to list which products are covered by the exemption. So we have letterpress. So there are hundreds of small chocolate companies in the United States, and they are not listed here. And again, so if you don't have a nutrition label on your bar, you need to file for an exemption. And notice that this is also true for foreign companies. So Omnom is in Iceland, Pump Street is in the UK. We have companies that are in Canada, right? Artisan de Chocolat, again, is in the UK. So you need to have one of these small business labeling exemptions. So if you don't have one already. Final one that I want to talk about is, I mentioned that here's section 101, which is food labeling. There is a food labeling guidance. And there is on this page here a PDF. And you can download this PDF, and you've got the FDA nutrition labeling guide. So really, really important when you talk about putting together your label that you follow what it is that this label says. So are there any abnormal labeling requirements that you're aware of when CBD is included other than disclosure and realistic? So the answer to that question is not at a federal level, because right now CBD regulations and cannabis regulations are state by state, that all of the labeling requirements are going to be handled on a state by state basis and will be in addition to whatever the FDA labeling guidelines are. So these are things you need to do So on a state-by-state basis, what Massachusetts require, I know, is different from what New York requires, is different from what California requires. And so you're going to need to follow the state guidelines for labeling. And those state guidelines are in addition to whatever the federal labeling requirements are. So are there any abnormal labeling requirements that you are aware of? Abnormal. Well, I don't think of it as abnormal. It's just what your local legislators have decided are required in order to be able to indicate that there are, in fact, these substances in the product. They're there to make sure that small children don't actually get dosed with these things, don't ingest them. It's chocolate. You want to make sure that children don't take substances which, based on their small size, might have a potential adverse impact on health and well-being. So there is a real reason for doing them. And I would say that one of the reasons why I'm not in favor of flavorless extracts, I want things that have some flavor in them, certainly in my THC-based edibles, is that I can smell it, and I know that I'm going to be ingesting something which has these chemicals in them. If it is odorless and flavorless, I have no idea what it is that I'm eating. So just my personal feelings about that. And now I'm going to circle back on this question from Mark, Mark Anuri at Blue Spruce. The Ruby chocolate deviating from identity standard, temporary market permit. Okay, so let's go to CFR 21 and let's go look for the word citric acid. Right. So notice that when we talk about cacao nibs, right, we can talk about a neutralizing agent, and citric acid is listed as a neutralizing agent. Notice that it says the total amount, singly or in combination, of citric acid and tartaric acid is not greater than 1%, 1 part by weight. So it turns out that in the fermentation process, a neutralizing agent, in this particular case, citric acid, is added to the fermentation pile to keep the beans from oxidizing. And that is the whole thing about ruby chocolate, right? We normally think about brown as the color of chocolate. Everything that's about ruby is how do we keep the chocolate from turning brown, right? How do we keep the cocoa beans, their purple color, right? So when they get done with fermentation and drying, they're still purple, right? And then how do we, through the manufacturing process, make sure that we don't actually also oxidize, right? And oxidize the purple and turn it into brown, right? What happens with ruby is that when you measure the residual citric acid content, right? And that's part of what provides the tartness. There is no added citric acid in the manufacturing process that I'm aware of, right? Because it's trade secret, whereas the patent covers the fermentation or the post-harvest processing part of it. But in any event, the amount of residual citric acid in ruby is above this 1 part limit, and therefore you legally can't call it chocolate, right? And so what Barry Callebaut did is they could call it ruby, they just couldn't call it chocolate. And the first product that came into the United States was actually, ruby, right? That's what they called it. But they weren't, but until they got what's called a temporary marketing permit, but they basically went to the FDA and petitioned and said, listen, the only difference, right, is that we have a slightly too much citric acid. We're not adding it in as a flavoring. We're not adding it in, right, in a specific kind of way. It's used in post-harvest processing. What we'd like you to do is we'd like you to let us call it chocolate, because in every other respect, it adheres to the standards of identity. And there is, in fact, historical precedent for this, because between 1936, 1937, and let's jump to another area. So I didn't talk about this earlier, is that if we look at the standard of identity for white chocolate, so 136.124, you'll find this little citation at the bottom, right? And the citation at the bottom, right, says that this particular regulation, this particular standard was put into effect, became effective January 1, 2004. So between 1936 and 2004, right, if you found a package right, sold in the United States, and that package said white chocolate, it was sold using a temporary marketing permit, right? Every 2 years, I think it is, right? Anybody who wanted to sell a white chocolate product would petition the FDA and says, here's our ingredients, here's how we conform. In all other respects, we'd like you to allow us to call this what we're making white chocolate. And the FDA would say, okay, we're going to give you a temporary marketing permit to call it white chocolate. And after doing this for 60 some odd years, the industry got together and petitioned the FDA to add a standard into the standard of identity, into 21.163, so that there would be a legal definition of white chocolate, so they didn't have to come back every couple of years and apply for a temporary marketing permit. And this is, in effect, what I believe the question you're asking is, deviating from identity standard, temporary permit for market testing is Mark in your end. Again, if you can send me the link to the actual document they're referring to, I may go search it now that I have the full title of it. This is what they're referring to, right? Is the notion of we're really, really close to meeting the standard of identity for chocolate. And by the way, Ruby, right? There are formulations. There are sweet chocolate formulations. There are milk chocolate formulations. I believe the first version of Ruby that came out is actually closely adheres to a milk chocolate ingredient definition. So yeah, there's no reason why it has to be a milk chocolate or a white chocolate. It can be any of the definitions. As a matter of fact, I've tasted a quote unquote dark chocolate recipe version at the Callebaut factory in Visa. I want to say 2018 or something like that. So I know that Callebaut has been doing work in that area. All right. Whew, man, that's a lot of stuff to cover in a very, very short period of time. I want to thank everybody who hung on for the last hour. It has been a deep dive, and it's been interesting for me and helpful for me, as I say, to go through the research and put together these resources and be able to share them with you today. What I will remind everybody as I'm doing this that today's sponsor is The Chocolate Life. So if you are not already a member, you're not already a subscriber, you're not already a supporter, there are a couple of things you can do. Number one is, no matter where you might be watching this, whether it's live or in a replay on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn, hit the like button, let everyone know, let the algorithms know that you have enjoyed watching what it is that you're doing. And there's always the opportunity to support what I'm doing. If you go to TheChocolateLife.com and you're not a member, there's a join button, right? You can join. There's always a free tier, but there's some members only tier. And I appreciate all of the support that anybody can give to me going forward. I understand that, dollars are hard to come by, and there are lots of different pulls on those dollars in lots of different directions. And so any support that you can give is greatly appreciated. And with that, I want to say thank you very much to everybody. I'm going to be back on Tuesday. I'm working on an extension in this series, and it's because basically, what is craft chocolate? I'm going to dive back into that controversy. I gave a talk at Chocoa. Spent a long time when I was in Brazil speaking with people around definitions around bean to bar and craft. I've been talking about language quite a bit over the last couple of months, so I wanted to put it all together in one particular post and one particular live stream. And that's what I'm going to be talking about this coming Tuesday. And with that, I just want to say to everyone, thank you very much for joining me today. And as always, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Ciao, everyone.